What's a company secret you can share now because you don't work there anymore? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. In the early 2000s, the big animation studios in the USA all colluded to informally stop hiring anyone currently working in the other studios within the agreement. This had a huge impact on wage growth for animation artists who couldn't move within the industry. 10 years later, a class action lawsuit had them all sued and settling for well over $150 million to the workers who experienced this sort of wage theft. Yes, House of Mouse, Shrek, all the big names were doing it. Story 2. I worked at a casino that had the vault separated from the parking lot by an uninsulated, non-load-bearing, empty wall with sheetrock on one side and a stucco surface on the outside. On any given day, the vault contains several million in small bills, but I've seen that room with a mid-8-figure sum after a big weekend. They've changed the layout now, but for a while there, the only protections that room had were cameras and obscurity. Story 3. I worked for a sleep diagnostic company during both SARS and the swine flu outbreaks of the mid-2000s. Not a lab, but a company who made the hardware and software that was installed in sleep labs in hospitals all across North America. Hospital sleep labs were almost always in the respiratory care wing. We had a team of technicians whose job it was to travel to hospitals and install the equipment. During SARS, Toronto was locked down, and air travel in and out was almost completely banned. We had a tech who lived in downtown Toronto. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the company had this guy drive to another city, usually Ottawa, and fly out of there to bypass the flying ban. Just before swine flu really hit the news, something swept through our office. People were really fudge sick. Our traveling technicians were all forced out onto planes and into respiratory care wings of hospitals across the continent. Anyone who complained was told to shut up and do their jobs. Swine flu made several rounds through the office, and these guys were always traveling while sick. So yeah, my company helped spread 2 nasty viruses directly to hospital departments loaded with people who were by definition very vulnerable to the effects of said viruses. Answer. I did some training videos for a very large airline in November of 2019. Spent 3 whole days in a cramped 777 sim cockpit with a flight crew that just came back from China. I got sick, was really sick. Like fever, chills, and then had a hacking cough for 4 months. Went to a university research hospital in town, took all kinds of tests and blood work, and they finally threw up their arms and said, "It appears to be a virus of some sort." By the time I finally felt better the end of February 2020, the whole world shut down. Another person on my crew got confirmed long-term COVID. Oddly enough, I had been exposed to it several times before the vaccine and never tested positive. You cannot convince me otherwise that I didn't have COVID in Nova-19. Story 4. Not really a secret, but you know those conventions where you put your card in a jar for a random prize? I was walking by the sales office after, and they were taking them out one by one, discussing who's the most important and deciding who the winner should be. Edit. Fixed up, but your mistake. I know, unforgivable. Answer. I went to an outdoor event that had a raffle. I have been a number of times over the past 20 years. Never won anything before. Over the last few years, my wife and I had some luck and have started making very good money. More than most at these things. One of the questions in the raffle entry form is household income. Would you guess it? I won the grand prize. Some lift tickets to a ski resort I don't want to ski at. Everyone else that won that night had the look of being well off. I'm almost certain that they picked the highest earners so they will spend more money on their products. Story 5. I worked for a poker site. We had staff members who were experienced poker players playing cash games to win money from our players. Yes, they could also see what the other players had and what cards were coming on flop, turn, and river. I worked in security, so knew all about this, but was basically told to get sacked and get a heavy beating if it ever got out. Story 6. At Comcast, if you ever were unable to pay bills, we would set payment plans. You would need to do a minimum payment, but it'd keep your service on, and the minimum could be paid later. If you were nice, we could also waive up to $100. You need a rep with knowledge to waive the previous balance versus coming balance, or it could get applied to the next billing cycle. If you fell really far behind, collections external, you could set up a payment plan and get your bills reduced by up to 70. We also see every adult content you rent and how long you've watched it, what room, and how many times you turned it on off. Story 7. I did development for a large sunglass company. The high-end luxury brands you pay in the hundreds of dollars for usually come from the same factories in China as the low-end goods sold at Target. The lenses are not necessarily better quality in many cases either. When you plunk down a lot of money for Armani, RL, Prada, and Versace, you are not necessarily getting top-of-the-line quality frames and lenses like you think. Story 8. Those employees at Claire's that pierce your ears? They can literally just be 1,516 yo kids with no work experience, literally on their first day at their very first job, told to go out and start piercing ears. Just pretend you've done this before. I was one of those kids. Story 9. If you dump grandma's ashes in a ride at an amusement park, grandma is going to end up in a vacuum cleaner bag in the trash. If you dump her ashes outside, they will be swept up and trashed or hosed down into the sanitary sewer drain. Grandma is definitely not spending eternity in the haunted mansion. Story 10. The plant has over 10 years without a lost time accident. That's because if someone gets hurt bad enough to miss work, they're suddenly e-training, either at a desk in the office or, more often, working from home. Plant line workers working from home? Yeah, right. I've seen dudes drugged out of their gourds with bandages and drainage tubes asleep at a PC doing e-training. The company wins safety awards from the state every year. Answer: I worked for a company that hired a ton of temps, and if you were lucky, they would eventually hire you on full-time. I got hired full-time after maybe 6 months. I was there for maybe 2 years, and in that time, a bunch of temps got hurt from tripping over stuff because the company just cared more about high production than making sure things were safe. Anytime a temp got hurt tripping over something, the temp agency was told they were no longer needed. This kept their lost time accident at zero for several years. One day I was riding my bike into work, my only mode of transportation at the time, and they just had the parking lot resealed. It was raining pretty bad, and when I turned into the parking lot on my bike, I wiped out and banged my head on the ground, good enough to give myself a concussion, and I wasn't allowed to leave and go to the hospital. I had to wait and go on my own time. That concussion fudged me up pretty good for 3 months, and I couldn't even do simple math and had a throbbing headache. Fudge you, CSM Bakery. Story 11. The milkshakes you get at Steak and Shake are not made from ice cream. They get a special container called Shake Base that tastes terrible but basically thickens up the milk that they blend in. They have ice cream for Sundays, they just don't use it in the shakes because it's too expensive. If you watch the commercials, they promote hand-dipped milkshakes, but they never say what they are hand-dipping. Story 12. I used to work at a rock radio station. If they were giving away a nice prize to the 10th caller and wanted that winner on the air, we would pick the first caller that was super excited, even if it was before or after the 10th caller. If it was a smaller prize where we didn't want to put the winner on the air, we would pick the actual 10th caller. Answer. That reminds me of a story from HS in the very early 2Ks. A local, very small radio station was giving away tickets to a midnight showing of The Two Towers for the night of the release. It was probably 1 a.m. when I heard the giveaway. I believe they said that the 10th caller would get 4 tickets for the movie. So I called in, and I was caller 1. Called back, and I was caller 2. Called back again, and I was caller 3. It was either the 3rd or 4th back-to-back calls that they figured out that I was the only caller. They just gave up and said that I won, and that I would be on the air as the winner. After taking me off the air, they asked how many tickets I wanted, and I said 10. They gave it to me, so a bunch of my friends got to see it at midnight. Sadly, only 8 showed up. Story 13. You may think defense contracting only goes. World conflict happens. Government decides to intervene. Government reaches out to defense contractor for weapons to achieve peace. Contractor develops weapons for government based on conflict. What happens? Defense contractor uses internal funding to develop weapons. Defense contractor scours the globe looking for potential conflicts to use weapons on. Defense contractor uses contacts in government for sales presentation of weapons capabilities and to urge escalation of conflicts under the guise of furthering innovation. Government uses political influence to escalate conflict defense. Contractor shareholders make millions of dollars. Rinse and repeat. I've sat in these presentations and they are void of morality. Answer. Also, in my experience, the bidding process is just a total shoot show. Government wants a certain contractor. RFP is written in a way that all but guarantees the outcome. Want to appear you're saving money? Give it to the lowest bidder without any regard to experience. And give raises, promotions to the people that made it happen. Who cares if it goes over budget and results in a worse product? If there's a perceived critical enough need, schedules and budgets are just suggestions anyway. I imagine the reality is significantly worse than what I'm outlining here. I wasn't in the defense industry long and was a lowly peon, but even at my level, the ineptitude was blatant. Story 14. Private equity groups own a large chunk of vet clinics, but when they buy out your local vet clinic, they keep the same name so you don't think it's corporate. They then jack up prices based on the average area income while bullying distribution for lower prices, thus increasing their margins, sometimes up to 400. If you don't mind driving, try to find more rural clinics in lower income areas for better vet prices. If they do livestock, it's less likely they are corporate, although this is starting to change. Story 15. If you have Kohl's cash and it's going to expire before you use it, buy something random with it, then return it. You'll get the Kohl's cash refunded and it'll last for 30 days. They used to accept expired vouchers 7 days after, but that's going away this summer. Story 16. I used to work for a medical software company. One of the divisions, not mine, was using live patient data as their test data. They did nothing to anonymize it. They also did not have any of their test systems encrypted. Their office was broken into and most of the computers stolen along with all the unencrypted patient data. The company didn't want to deal with the high pay violation fines, so they lied about what was stolen on the police report and lied about the data they were using. Story 17. Throwaway account. I started working at Enterprise Rental Cars at the end of 2019. When the pandemic hit April of 2020, they laid a bunch of us off, then brought us back in July. Part of it was special training on how to effectively disinfect the cars between renters. They were advertising heavily that every car was sterilized between each customer. I cleaned exactly one car with the new procedure before the desk complained that I was taking too long to clean the car. I wasn't hitting their 3 cars per hour metric. All of the service agents dropped the cleaning procedures and went back to just a quick vacuum. They stopped complaining because we were hitting their vaunted 3 cars per hour clean metric. Also, the official policy when the oil change warning came up on the dash was reset the mileage so the light would be off for the customer. Those poor cars never had the oil changed unless they were otherwise in the shop for repair. Story 18. I worked at Boston Market back in the 90s when I was in high school. They're long gone now, and I'm sure things changed after I left when I went off to college. Not so much a secret as it's something people would probably find surprising. Everything there, except for the pies and cakes, was made fresh, either made in back of house or at the commissary kitchen at one of the nearby locations. All of the proteins came in raw and were cooked on site. Chickens came from the commissary already loaded onto the spits for the rotisserie, but all of them were cooked in the ovens you saw behind the counter. The sides were prepped fresh in the back kitchen as well. Edit. Realized the soup was also not technically fresh, as the bases came from concentrate, but the chicken that was added came directly from those we cooked on site. Story 19. When I worked at Electronics Boutique, we never tested anything that was traded in. We would have a visual check of the conditions of discs, give consoles a good clean, then just resell everything and let the customers test it for us. If it came back faulty, they just got an immediate refund or exchange, and that was the point they were tested at. I think the time saved was more worthwhile to the company than the odd bit of lost money on a trade. We traded so much there would have been one member of staff full-time testing stuff. Far cheaper to just bin the odd mistake. Answer. I worked for Radio Shack back in the day, and my location was in a mall next to an electronics boutique. Unusually, they had about 80 secondhand copies of Tomba for PS1, which were marked at 2 each. This is now a 150-200 game LOL. Nobody wanted them, and the staff came to really dislike the game, as they noted that a lot of the people who traded it in compared to other games were difficult to deal with. So to cope, they would play frisbee with the discs after hours. I used to stop by after my shift to hang out with them, and they were doing this constantly. One night someone brought a baseball bat and people threw the discs, and someone tried to hit them in the air with the bat. A few of the discs were irreversibly destroyed, and the rest went right back on the shelf with no checks. Story 20. The heavily environmental regulated industry capable of producing massive greenhouse gas emissions that gets inspected regularly for UPI compliance. We always knew at least 24 hours in advance when an inspection was coming and covered things up to be compliant. As soon as the inspectors left, the plant was wide open and absolutely dumping gases. Story 21. You know that exceptional, world-renowned hospital with the lowest mortality rate across all surgical procedures? They manipulate their operating room mortality percentage by wheeling any crashing patients into the ICU, which coincidentally starts in the hallway outside the OR. This has become commonplace in surgical departments. Deaths in OR are extremely detrimental to surgeons, departments, and hospitals, and the stats are manipulated as a patient is dying by wheeling them into an adjoining room. That's not surgery. Story 22. Phase Technologies. They produce 3-phase machines and motor starters. If you work in the plumbing, oil, heavy equipment like lathes, AC, etc., or most certainly in the farming industries, you may have heard them. They primarily focus their sales in the farming industries to work on pivots and pumps. But did you know, anytime they release a new product, they have most certainly not tested it enough in real-world conditions. Basically, knowing that the product that can cost thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars will malfunction, break, or catastrophically fail in less than a week from delivery. Furthermore, you want to buy a warranty at a premium price of 600 euros or more? Guess what? You won't get any repair parts sent out to you. Plus, we don't have any service members that can come out to you to fix your 100,000 piece of equipment you just broke. Nope. You have to pay to send it to us, that is on your dime. And if we deem the issue to have been caused by you through whatever arbitrary nonsense we just make up, guess what? Your warranty is invalid and you now have to pay to get it shipped back to you. Oh wait, there is more. Did you buy one of the motor drivers for your garage door or something? Well, you see, they advertise that the 3 amp or 5 amp model can drive your door, but really you'll need a 30 amp driver, even though your machine is rated for far less. So don't trust what they have on their site, whether it be warranty, details, or even price. Seriously, this was the scummiest company I've ever had the pleasure to work for, and am glad I no longer work for them. Story 23. Monitored home burglar alarm systems don't prevent burglaries. A beware of dog sign on the fence and a large dog water bowl on the porch make a much better deterrent. I worked many levels in the industry for 10 years. Story 24. Worked at a water park for my first job. I dropped a hamburger bun on the disgusting floor during a rush, and my lead, without even turning around, told me put that bun on the burger and give it to the customer. I don't even know how she knew I dropped the bun. The food director gave me a Vicodin on the job because I jammed my finger. Employees fudge like crazy in the food stands. Story 25. A major law firm I worked for suffered a cyber attack. They never publicly disclosed it. I think they secretly told some clients, but it wasn't news. I don't know the full extent of the damage or data lost, but it caused them to change a lot of things, so I assume it was a big deal. Story 26. Safety first only applies when it hurts their profit margins. I worked at an industrial site where they repeated this constantly. There was a large tool cabinet that was on unsteady ground that everyone was complaining about, as it would teeter every time someone opened or closed it. Company wouldn't do anything about it. One day it fell on someone and eliminate them. Suddenly the company was all, this was a preventable accident and we should all do better, naturally shifting the blame everywhere but themselves. The passing was never reported on in the news, and we were encouraged not to talk about it out of respect for the family. Not going to say what company it was, because I don't want to get sued. Let's just say they're pretty gassy, and you find them a lot on the beach. Story 27. About to be laid off, so the secret ingredient to my work's mac and cheese? Yellow food coloring. The kids won't touch it if it isn't orange. We use egg shade food dye, and it makes it that craft orange, and they love it. Tried it without. Same recipe and ingredients, and they complained, wanted the old recipe back. Story 28. The cleaning products that a large corporation sells to restaurants and other food industries are mostly commodity chemicals, e.g. are diluted nitric or sulfuric acid, etc., with color added for marketing. Some products are actually worse than just hot water, but you can't sell that, so. Story 29. I worked as a private security for people who make millions per year. Among them were church pastors, preachers, and other so-called religious men. And these religious men like the substances and the youngest girls. Despite having so much to lose, they are stingy when it comes time to pay. There are movie stars, music makers, and other super rich people who live in regular houses, drive shoot cars, and live in your communities as the person next door. The creepy house on your block that has the weirdo stranger watching you from behind, drawn blinds, and only goes out at night. It is because whoever lived there does not want to be recognized. 90 of my guard duty for these people was to dress like a bum and deal with services providers like phone men, internet and cable, landscapers, make sure the house was stocked with food and drink, and to accept packages. One of our clients had an 800 square foot hidey hole that looked like a rundown trailer house on the outside where she would watch movies, eat pizza, and talk with the assigned guard all night long. We had another trio of musicians who had a 3-bedroom townhouse, and they would crash there to write songs, and the guard was the one ordering the food and running fetch errands. Answer: you gotta drop names, or at least some hints, man. You'd be surprised how many musicians actors have a public image, and the rest of the time they're regular schlubs like most of us, especially if they're B-list or lower. But even A-listers, Richard Gere, his father lived in the same house since the early 1960s until he died a couple of years ago. I'm talking a regular as fudge ranch house a mile from me in a regular suburb of Syracuse that still looked like it was trapped in the 1970s. While there were always Richard Gere sightings around town, I never saw him. The notion was he probably just came to visit his father and also to get away from the life. His father was a local volunteer in his retirement who pretty much lived under the radar. But you'd think the father of an A-list celebrity would be living the life too? Nope. We also have some famous musicians living around here who also live in fairly regular houses in regular neighborhoods driving regular cars too. Story 30. Work for Whirlpool Refrigerator Factory. You're paying hundreds of dollars more for deluxe models that have essentially the same compressors, hardware, wiring, etc. One I remember the most was a Kenmore Elite versus a cheaper KitchenAid model. Literally the only difference was the glass shelves had lines and the other didn't. About a $600 difference in price. Story 31. The majority of the chips we made that were put in hair dryers to blow when they accidentally fall in your tub, preventing electrical shock, never passed through testing. The bean counters decided it was more expensive to recall the chips than to actually have to pay out for an accidental passing. Story 32. The goal of every Best Buy employee, as with most retail now, is to get you to sign up for a credit card or paid membership. If you already have them, then you're essentially a waste of their time. Every product they show you is because it has a promotion that goes with one of the two signups they need, interest-free financing and member deals being the main hooks. There are more things to push depending on the department too. For example, if a laptop is being sold, the employee is expected to get them to sign up for Microsoft 365 on top of a credit card and paid membership. If you already know what you want, the best way to shop there is to order it online for in-store pickup. There is basically no opportunity to sell you on anything else since the sales transaction is already over. Story 33. This will get lost, but I worked for a gaming wholesaler during the Magic the Gathering days. They were making a mint already, but the owner went even further. He took a chunk of the boxes they received, and these were already pre-ordered by the stores he sold to, claimed they'd been shorted, and then resold them at retail under a different name to the stores. Say you ordered 100 boxes of cards. You'd get told, oops, we got less than we hoped. Here's 80 boxes. If there was an actual shortage, he'd still pull it, so you'd get 60. You're paying wholesale, say $40 per box. You complain to your rep, who then says, well, I know a store that has them for sale, only that store is a chick in the next office with a different phone line, pretending to be a different company. There you get charged a massive markup, so retail the box would be 100. With a wholesale distributor, you were supposed to pay 40. Dude shorted your order, then sold you the boxes he withheld at a massive markup, to the point where you were paying $400 a box and thanking the faux company for helping. Scumbag. Story 34. Maybe I was only one that did it, but back when I worked at Blockbuster, if you were a male body part when asking me if we had the most popular movie of the weekend in stock, I would walk over, check the drop box, and tell you nope while staring at 3 copies laying there, ready to be checked back in. Treat people in customer service with respect, and it'll take you a lot farther. Story 35. You ever go into a cell phone store, and the person working with you asked you to unlock the phone W, and then say they need to take it to the back to diagnose something or get a coworker's opinion? They were very likely looking for private pictures. I saw up to district management levels participate in this and was told by my manager that it wasn't worth pursuing. Also, we would get asked to try to access spouse and children's phones all the time. Story 36. Pawn shop 1. Always clean the item before bringing it in and be ready to show it works. 2. Be kind to the broker you're working with. This can go a long way in how they negotiate with you. 3. Have the broker quote a price before you do. They will always ask what you're looking for first to see if it's less than what they'd max offer. Negotiate after the broker quotes a price. 4. They have no interest in your situation or financial struggles. Literally 80 of the people in there have the same issues, so stick to general talk. 5. Our shop would typically pay $25-30 of new price found online or at retailers. Yes, internet is available for them to reference. They also have set prices to pay for common items. Video game systems, TVs, accessories, etc. If you're not comfortable only receiving around 25 of new for your item, even in good condition, don't bother coming in to sell and go to FB Marketplace instead. 6. Inventory is the pawn shop's biggest failure point. It doesn't make the shop any money with items sitting on the shelf. The broker doesn't have any skin in the game for items on the floor for sale, so use that to your advantage. Make an offer less than the sticker price. Likely they will consider it and either accept or counter. Again, too much inventory eliminate pawn shops and they get a lot of it every day. 7. Lastly, the biggest secret. Always tell the broker you want to pawn your item instead of sell. Pawn shops would much rather give you a loan and you pay a large amount of interest and then have you pick up the item at the end. It removes the inventory aspect and doesn't waste labor or time trying to sell the item later on, if it ever does sell. Not picking up the item you pawn doesn't hurt your credit score, and nobody really keeps track of whether or not you pick up your items. Conversely, you're much more likely to get a few extra dollars for something you pawn due to the broker thinking you may come to pick it up, and the more they loan out to you, the more interest they will get. You'll get much more room to haggle on items you sell if you tell them that you wish to pawn your item and just never pick up. You're welcome. Answer: I used to make a good deal of my living off pawn shops. Some pawn shops have good inventory for resale. Industrial or blue-collar areas are the best. The pawn shop managers generally knew me and gave me good deals as I'd spend a lot of money. One pawn shop had an HP instrument that was used to test cell tower electronics. I made a deal for $1,200 and put it on layaway, then listed it on eBay and sold it for $5,000. The guy buying from me exported these types of instruments to China. I've made lots of deals like that over the years. That's why my username is Junkman Jim. Story 37. Being a janitor was like double weird, walking in places the general public can't. Baseball locker rooms. Also hearing things in bathrooms behind the scenes. Rumors happen even in general management. Story 38. Used to work for Rolex. We did have very low stock, only like 50 watches a month. If someone wanted something, you had to present the case to the manager with a massive story why they deserved the item, but mostly they went to the boss's friends or people willing to give you gifts under the table. All of the super rare watches were sold to friends of the business, who would often buy the owner elaborate gifts. You'd be encouraged to get people to buy ladies' watches or undesirable pieces to show they were serious enough to buy a sub or whatever. Story 39. Pfizer does not reimburse remote employees for printers, ink, or paper even if you're printing Pfizer documents, doing Pfizer work during Pfizer hours. Yes, really. Despite generating billions in annual revenue, they've decided your 12 ream of paper is where fiscal responsibility begins. Story 40. Chewy has great customer service because they know that's what makes money. They do not give a shoot about the human experience. I worked in an office without a bathroom. I was also forced to arrive to work early and stay late to power up down my computer off the clock, which, yes, is illegal, and yes, they were sued over it. I could go on. The fact that they preach the customer service practices that they do almost makes it worse because it's obvious that they know how to treat people with dignity and respect. They just don't believe their employees deserve it. Story 41. A certain CEO of a donut company was having an affair with a coworker. Before he divorced his wife, he made her a partial franchise owner. After the divorce, this company bought this one franchise back for 3 times what it was worth as to pay her off with shareholder money. He was soon fired after being called the worst CEO of the year late 2004. Golden parachute was applied, was told this by a close friend. Story 42. When a dealership knocks off a few bucks of the sticker price, they tack $1,000s of dollars on the back end. I don't know how they do it, but when I sold cars, the manager would get so offended when people would offer $500 less than the sticker price. I'd always hear him mumble, "Let's see how that cocksucker likes paying an extra $3,000 on the back end." That dude was the reason my car selling career was so short. Story 43. I used to work for a medical school. We graduated students who never should have graduated because having a higher percentage of students graduating is an important statistic for attracting more applicants and making more money. The school would make these students agree to never become medical doctors and only do research work. This isn't super easy to enforce, and there are likely doctors practicing medicine that agreed not to and should have never been allowed to become doctors. Story 44. I worked in casinos. Everyone knows that the slots are tricked for you to lose your money, but you can't imagine how heavily it is tricked for you to lose. We had a showroom in the office with slots, and we only needed to press one button to put more money in it. We were never able to win any good amount. We even tricked the machine and played for whole 2 days in a row without any substantial gains. I was working for the biggest and best slot machines company in the world. That's why they are the best. You can't win anything with slots. Story 45. Video rental store night managers actually care about you. Late fees can be wiped off completely if you're not a male body part. I can't say this was franchise-wide, but my boss made it very clear. I had multiple customers who just needed someone to just be cool. It might not be much, but they appreciated it. Story 46. You know how every time you search for anything on WebMD, you end up thinking you have some horrendous, incurable, chronic ailment? That's not an accident. They are not a health information site, but another shill for big pharma. Almost all of their revenue comes from pharma advertising, sponsorship, and data mining. Story 47. When I worked at Goodwill, we had a morning meeting daily. That meeting was basically all about sales. Nonprofit, my jerk. I think it's cool the way they give jobs to disabled people, but after that, they suck. Also, anything valuable you donated didn't see the sales floor. It went to online sales. Story 48. Company that calls itself an employee, benefits consulting firm, but is really just set up to grift public tax dollars in school systems through the marketing of unnecessary or barely needed services out of state employees, who often already have those benefits without a need for an additional one. Atlanta, Georgia HRQD. But owner sold, October 2022, the firm to a national enterprise that is far more legit in their services and operations, based out of Chicago, IL. I can name names. Story 49. CN Rail had us all burning our garbage next to the train tracks instead of bringing it back with us to the stations each day, just to save time and money. When Parks Canada found out they were making us do this in the national parks, they started sending out rangers to check that we were complying, and CN instructed us to get better at hiding it. Story 50. Nobody ever dies on company property. They give you CPR until ambulance arrives and pronounce you deceased later at the hospital to avoid having to pay out any accidental passing benefits from a multi-billion-dollar company. Story 51. All of the food banks in the United States have been purchasing poor quality canned and other types of processed, shelf-stable foods from China and Canada to make their money stretch further. With the new tariffs, that is no longer able to be done. This means that the local food shelves have less access to free and expensive, non-perishable food items to distribute to those in need. There are going to be a lot more hungry Americans, with a large percentage of those Americans being children and the elderly in the near future. Story 52. Celeb PR and politician PR pay people to post on social media, including Reddit. They also use bots. It's an entire industry. They pay mods and admins to push certain narratives and remove certain others. PR firms and law firms work together on stuff like this. With enough money and pull, they can create or change entire public opinions. Story 53. The big boss knew that the 26-year-old manager, who was married with 2 kids, was hooking up with 17-year-old employees. But because AOC in the state is 17, there wasn't much he could do about it. It is why certain rather pretty girls work the favorable after-school weekday shifts when business is slow, and the less conventionally attractive girls and all the boys work primarily in the mega rush hours. Story 54. He Shabihun. Early to mid-2000s, I worked at a small East Coast fried chicken chain called Cluck You. At least in the location we were, the chicken was battered, breaded, and fried by us. Not really me, the chef did it, and I mostly just cut up the meat and was the delivery driver. And all the sides were made from scratch. The only thing that came in pre-made was the hot sauces and the biscuits, which were basically just Aldi's tube biscuits thrown in the deep fryer. And the hottest of the hot sauces was basically mace. Story 55. Worked for marketing firm. Some of the bigger contracts are with the big studios. For at least the last 10 years, the most common title has been social media specialist, and they are often given directives to focus on posting positive feedback on shows or movies that had low ratings and had a large percentage of feedback. Long-running hit series also have these specialists focus on content creation, including memes. So basically, people that create memes about shows for fun are doing work for free, while people are being paid a fair salary to do the same. That big franchise sci-fi show that had a huge backlash a while back still has paid marketers saying it is a great show on that subreddit. Story 56. Worked in the office of a cleaning company. Tiny company, so I had a hand in most things. Pretty questionable, lax immigration, status validations, and wage theft. Probably felt more comfortable doing it since both sides knew a lot of the workers weren't there legally. And the ones that were legal either didn't know what the time clock system was doing was illegal or didn't have money for lawyers anyway. Owner of the company fired 2 HR payroll VPs who tried to get compliant on this stuff. They started hinting that they'd like me to start helping out with some HR and payroll stuff, and that's when I polished up the resume. I would have been an idiot to sign my name to those forms. This was a long time ago, probably 10 years. No clue if any of this got fixed. Story 57. I worked at Toys R Us and I managed the doll section. I can only speak for the store I worked at. Non-white dolls had very little sales. By far, blonde-haired, blue-eyed dolls sold the best. I imagine for doll companies, it's hard to balance creating the products the customers want versus creating the product they actually buy. Story 58. I used to work at a restaurant. One of the secret menu hacks people loved ordering this huge, messy off-menu burger was actually just made up by the employees as a joke one day. It wasn't even real at first, but people started asking for it thanks to TikTok. So we made it real and started charging extra. Corporate never officially added it to the menu, but we made so much money off it. Story 59. Many years ago, I applied for a job ad for a plumbing company. I didn't know jack, but was willing to learn. They asked me if I had sales experience. They said that sometimes there is a call which really needs a 10-cent washer replaced. But if we cannot tell them that and instead upsell them to a whole new bathtub, it's much better for business. I did not pursue it further. Story 60. Back when I worked at this big-name coffee chain, we had this little trick for when people ordered those super specific 7-word-long custom drinks. If the baristas were slammed and someone ordered a drink, we'd fake it half the time. Most people never noticed. And for the regulars, we'd make their drink how we remembered they actually liked it, even if their official order was a total performance. Story 61. Worked at Bayer, which is the old Monsanto. They are supposed to monitor how much chemicals and waste they throw out into the atmosphere and report it to the EPA. Well, all the motor hour tags that show in a software program when the sites were running were all digitally connected to one site on accident, so nobody knew for years how much pollution was going out and the wrong number was being reported. Was told to not say anything when my team found out, and it was swept under the rug. Story 62. Those gummy vitamins you buy, unless they are D3 or Vit C, aren't an effective enough dose to really do any good. The amount of sugar in each one far outweighs any benefits you're getting. Also, 75 of them are the same exact thing in a different bottle privately labeled. So if you're going to buy them, just buy the store brand and save. Story 63. Patagonia is a major defense contractor, but intentionally keeps a low profile and actively works to restrict the amount of publicly accessible information that is out there about their dealings with various nations' militaries. They often even conceal this info from their own employees. Every major outdoor apparel and equipment company is a defense contractor. It's just that some do a better job of concealing it than others. The entire outdoor rec industry is subsidized by the military-industrial complex, to the point where they're basically one and same. Many of the bigger defense-oriented brands will have the same parent companies. Story 64. This will probably get buried at this point, but I worked for a particularly infamous hemp-based wellness company. Think CBD, Delta-8, HHC, and all the rest of that not plant substance crap that would tout its grow processes and all natural products. We had doctors in lab coats and links to scientific studies. Not to mention, there were tons of consumer reviews. We were nothing more than a marketing company, and the business was basically a website. In fact, that's probably how most of that industry is run. The owners would source some crap, then brainstorm product names. If we had 5 products for sale, it was really 1 in 5 different boxes, and the verified lab tests weren't worth the paper the PDFs were printed on. Better still, because it was so easy, the bosses would create new businesses all the time. You dislike company A and decide to switch to company B? Guess what? Same owners, same product, different package, and all these companies are the same. During COVID, for example, they had no problem saying shoot like CBD cures COVID. A study on rats showed HHC might affect opioid use disorder. Our product stops addiction. It's used car salesmen pretending to be doctors. I've seen them take the do not call list and illegally mail them promos. And so much worse. What's scary now is that these assholes have begun selling the Kratom synthetic 7-OH. Now they're getting people hooked on real shoot and treating it like some spices you buy at the bakery. Just pace yourself, they say. Stay far away from that industry. Story 65. Worked at 2 Tex-Mex restaurants. The family-owned restaurant was super popular. They had like 6 locations in town. The way the food was made was horrible. Almost everything was microwaved and most of the food served was leftovers. Rice? Straight from the fridge. Beans? Same. Ground beef for tacos? Same. The only way you could guarantee fresh food is if it was anything that had to be grilled, like fajitas or quesadillas. The fillings were beef or chicken fajitas, maybe the fries from the kids' menu. But that's about it. It was just sad to see the cook make some fresh rice. But instead of serving it, he would stick into the cooler, have to use the old stuff first. Order of chicken enchiladas? Use the shredded chicken that's been sitting on the fridge for the last few days, add tomato sauce and spices, roll it into the enchiladas, cover it with more tomato soup, add cheese, then toss it into the microwave to melt the cheese and heat up the chicken. Customer didn't finish their chips? Back into the warmer. Same for the hot sauce. They cut corners everywhere and only wash the kitchen floors once a week. They're all closed now, but we're very popular for a while. On the other hand, I worked at another Tex-Mex restaurant, part of a chain, not Taco Bell. Everything was made fresh every day. The head chef arrived at 7 to have everything ready by 11. And even that time wasn't enough, as we would always rush towards the opening times. At night, they would throw away everything that wasn't used. The only thing we kept was ground beef, but we didn't use leftovers for tacos. We used it for filling in enchiladas. Both are now out of business, but the one who tried serving fresh food went out of business way before the other one did. Story 66. A company was building a product for their client, who is a big company. This client was already using a similar product from another vendor. The client gave the new company access to that older product. Using that access, the new company copied it and built the same product. As a result, the original vendor is now out of the picture for that client. Story 67. The bagged grated cheese in the supermarket is all the same cheese regardless of the brand on the bag. To clarify, all of the mozzarella bags are the same mozzarella. All of the cheddar bags are the same cheddar, etc. Moreover, in some instances, the grated cheese was originally packaged and sent to the store as block cheese. When it reached its sell-by date, it was returned to the cheese plant, unwrapped, put through the grater, and then sent back to the store as bagged grated cheese with a new sell-by date. Source worked as a temp in a cheese processing plant in Vermont. Story 68. The company I worked for in 2016 accidentally changed everyone's payment terms to 90 days from whatever it was because they weren't going to have enough cash by end of the month. It wasn't an accident, and the procedure was to fix it when it was asked about by our vendors. Story 69. I worked at Taco Bell for about 2 weeks in college. When I started, the bags of taco meat were supposed to be boiled, drained, and then used in the food. A week after I started, Corp changed the rules and said there was no need to drain it anymore to save time. It literally meant there was significantly more grease in the food, and people immediately started complaining about how greasy the food was, and some got sick from it. As far as I know, they still don't drain the meat before using it on the product. Story 70. Want to put your child in a preschool or daycare? Don't do it. The amount of child abuse, physical harm, neglect, unethical treatment, and stupidity by jerk employees who don't give a FK because they make $8-10 an hour and are not qualified because they're either still kids themselves or don't make enough to care. Mandatory reporting, instant termination, as you are now a business liability. You saw a child get smacked by a teacher, it gets swept under the rug and everybody's told to look the other way or is gaslit. Center directors would rather fire an employee and say they were mistaken to the parents or authorities than risk all the parents finding out their child is in danger and pulling them out of the school, causing the business to shut down within a week because, no more money. I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad. Story 71. Disney buys ground beef on the open market. So does Taco Bell. Taco Bell has enough buying power to put a lock on much of it. The shelf life is 16 days, but Taco Bell won't take anything after 10 days. Disney buys up the older than 10 years, but less than 16-day-old ground beef and serves it in their parks. That taco that you ate at Tortuga Tavern near Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah, the ground beef in it wasn't fit for Taco Bell standards. Also, the turkey legs are manufactured by layering turkey meat onto a bone. Story 72. On a Navy carrier, we just yeet our garbage in tall brown paper sacks off the back of the ship. At least sinkable trash like fruit cores, bones, and cans. Plastic was melted down into discs. I felt so guilty about it at the time that I started donating to Greenpeace. Story 73. The concrete crews pouring your house slab in Florida don't give a fudge about the density and strength of the concrete. They only want the work to be easier, so they wet up the concrete before it is poured so that they can do the finish work on it easier, or at least that's how they perceive it. And if your slab cracks, it will be years down the road, and you'll never get any monetary compensation from them. Story 74. Dixon's, a large electronics retailer in the UK, put a small colored dot on the shelf tag for each item so the salesperson knew what the margin was. There were just 3 categories. Green meant it was high margin and they should prioritize it. Red was log margin. Yellow was in between. They could sell the most profitable item instead of the best item for the customer. This was a long time ago, and I have no idea if they still do it. Story 75. Old people's care homes. Some are good, some are bad, and in most, the patients are totally dependent on overworked people who may or may not do their best. Witnessed as a temp that an old woman who was simulating, so I had to fight with the night nurse to get her at least aspirin for the pain she complained of, was dead when I showed up weeks later of undiagnosed stomach cancer. This could happen because there had been no doctor there for 3 months because of reasons. Please visit your relatives in care homes, people, or become one of the angels visiting people who have no one ever coming by. Story 76. I used to work for Sears Credit back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and there was a secret way to magically reset a customer's credit history and positively boost their credit score. I took customer calls for all of their credit products. A lot of calls were pretty straightforward. Address changes, promo APR not applied, etc. We used a system called TS Swiss. It's still around and is still used today in a lot of other businesses. And at the time, you used the keyboard to navigate around, use all the functions. Black screen, green type, no mouse. Turns out there was a glitch found by another team, and it was quietly passed around. Basically, we had an unauthorized ability to do a credit reset for a customer, meaning we could wipe any past due amounts and late fees and reset their payment history so that it appeared in their credit report as if they had a perfect payment history for the past 7 years. Doing so would reset everything Sears related with the 3 main credit bureaus. Keep in mind that at the time, Sears was the 8th largest bank in the U.S., and a lot of people's Sears card was their first credit card, and as a result, it weighed heavily on their credit score. Length of credit factors into credit scores. People with a 30-year credit history with Sears was not uncommon. Also, back then, it was the Wild West of credit. Things like universal default and huge interest changes due to one missed payment, e.g., potentially double your rate for being 24 hours late on one payment, were common, among other things. Any action we took, though, would become a permanent part of their internal account history, including documenting the call itself, so your fingerprints were on their internal record, so we had to be careful. The hack was, if you were in one particular screen for something random, I can't remember what, but it was along the lines of the screen for sending them a statement, you would simultaneously press 5 or 6 keys together, like F12K Shift L E, and then presto, a credit reset was performed. We all knew you could get fired if caught if a supervisor was looking over your shoulder, so it wasn't used often. Every once in a while, I would get a customer that had fallen behind or gotten screwed through no fault of their own or under seemingly tragic, sad circumstances. I could go back and see all their payment history to verify they were honest customers, and if their story didn't set off my BS meter and they were nice, I would sometimes perform this maneuver discreetly for them. I figured since I pray to the God of second chances, it's only right that I grant someone else's prayer, and I wasn't the only one too. This also taught me to always be nice and courteous to customer service reps, as sometimes those frontline people can pull more strings for you than you realize. I never got caught and was eventually promoted away off of the phones, though I know Sears eventually got wind of the glitch and patched it, so it was no longer available. Story 77. Been a while, so this may be no longer true, but sweet popcorn at the cinema I worked at came pre-popped in big blue bags and put in heaters. The smell of the cinema came from the salted popcorn that was made on site. Story 78. Dear Lord, reading these comments, and absolutely no one understands networks or telecommunications. Entire call centers are ran on dedicated private circuits that are on enterprise-grade connections. FIOs would not be used. Maybe as a tertiary backup if the primary and secondary connections go down, but that'd be it. Also, of course, cell providers use different last-mile connection to reach their cell sites regardless of geography, but it's always generally only last mile, and they go back to that cell provider's main network fairly quickly. Story 79. Worked in a manufacturing plant where we get shipments of pre-made products from China. They came in plastic wrapping, but without any product info on it. My job? To add our product info on the packaging, which included Made in America. Story 80. We removed the stickers and labels off of imported test kits for things like HIV, hepatitis B, etc., and put our My Boss's company stickers on it as if we had made them ourselves, which TBF, sometimes we did. I even learned how to photocopy the old company's product pamphlet to fade out their company's name and blend place hours over it. Felt very sketchy. Story 81. I think the most important thing to keep in mind when you hear stories like this is that they probably knew they would face legal trouble for this, but also knew they would save more money than they would have to pay out. These huge corporations aren't just stupid, greedy Scrooge McDuck types who think they can get away with this shoot. They're actually stupid, greedy Scrooge McDuck types who know they can get away with this shoot. Story 82. There's a depot in a local city where the farmers market sellers buy their bruised produce. IDK, how people believe that the guy who claims to have an organic farm in his backyard has overflowing crates of vegetables all year round in 20 varieties just from his yard. Story 83. I worked at an Apple dealer operating from a former bank building, and they stored all the stock in the vault. One night it was burgled and the contents emptied out. Even the customer laptops being serviced were stolen. Turns out the toilet behind the building with a padlocked door shared a brick wall with the vault and was the weakest part. The gang somehow knew ahead of time and came with jackhammers. Story 84. I did some training videos for a very large airline in November of 2019, spent 3 whole days in a cramped 797 sim cockpit with a flight crew that just came back from China. I got sick, was really sick, like fever, chills, and then had a hacking cough for 4 months. Went to a university research hospital in town, took all kinds of tests and blood work, and they finally threw up their arms and said, "It appears to be a virus of some sort." By the time I finally felt better the end of February 2020, the whole world shut down. Another person on my crew got confirmed long-term COVID. Oddly enough, I had been exposed to it several times before the vaccine and never tested positive. You cannot convince me otherwise that I didn't have COVID in Nov-19. Story 85. Oh yeah, well there was a world military basketball tournament in Wuhan, China, right before COVID was a thing. Our whole office got sick after a coworker went over there to compete in it. Pretty sure we had patient zero on at least the East Coast. They competed in AUK 2019. She was back in the office in November. By Deck 20th or so, the whole office was deathly sick during our Christmas party. CDC says the first case was 20 yuan, but I don't believe we didn't have it. Answer. My grandmother is in a nursing home and was there in December 2019. One of the other women there had family that visited China for a while before returning for the U.S. holiday season. In January, the flu eliminated 9 residents. In February, 5 more passed from pneumonia. When we finally got COVID in July 2020, my cough was exactly like my grandmother's had been and how the building sounded. 5 years on, and only my grandmother and 2 other women on the first floor are still there from that time. They have had a COVID outbreak 2 times a year since 2020, each time taking out a few more people. Story 86. My previous boss lied about traveling to China in February 2020. She flew to Singapore and then to the U.S. to avoid the ban. She coughed in a closed room with us for 2 days. I got so sick I missed my husband's surgery. I went to the doctor and they had no idea what to do with me. Told me to go home and write it out. That was right when guidance was coming out on COVID. She got stopped on her way back to Singapore because they actually looked at her travel history and saw she had been in China. Put her in quarantine for 9 days. Too late for me. Story 87. I knew someone that did that and offered a free trip to the Bahamas for the person that won the raffle. However, there was no free trip to Bahamas. They just did that to get people's names and phone numbers to get them to buy insurance or financial advice or whatever. Story 88. I went to an outdoor event that had a raffle. I have been a number of times over the past 20 years. Never won anything before. Over the last few years, my wife and I had some luck and have started making very good money, more than most at these things. One of the questions in the raffle entry form is household income. Would you guess it? I won the grand prize. Some lift tickets to a ski resort I don't want to ski at. Everyone else that won that night had the look of being well off. I'm almost certain that they picked the highest earners, so they will spend more money on their products. Story 89. This happened to me once. Sold the hell out of some raffle tickets for an organization. They called a meeting to draw for a winner, and I watched in disbelief as they kept pulling names until they found one they wanted. I don't participate in any raffles unless it's for a cause I would donate to anyway. Answer. I remember reading a blog talking about how there was a SUV giveaway for guess how many golf balls fit inside. The dude had a mathematics background and went to actually measure the interior to more precisely calculate. Anyway, the correct number and winner was announced. The math guy was like 2 off or something. The winner, someone with the same last name as the dealership owner. Edit. Thanks, Rowland, For you, I remembered some details wrong. They were 76 gasoline balls and husband and wife won. Wife apparently spoofed a different last name and household. I guess it's no longer in the spirit of the discussion, but it's interesting that they skirted rules and sent in a lot of entries to win. Story 90, completely unrelated, but this just reminded me of the time my brother, 13 or 14 at the time, entered a raffle drawing at the mall to win a jet ski, and he actually won. They called our house, and our mom had to explain that A, we had no use or space for a jet ski, and B, he was a child and legally not even allowed to have entered in the first place. We were pretty upset about it, LMO. Story 91. Former management here, and this is absolutely true. Also, every single ball of dough that gets shipped to stores nationwide is made at their Atlanta location. Same with the sauce, except the sauce gets finished, extra ingredients added, at the store as needed. Story 92. Now that you say it, it hits in my brain as being right. I use molasses in place of white sugar or honey in a lot of what I bake because of the depth of flavor and the chew factor. I like it. Gonna make pizza dough soon. Thanks, friend. Story 93. Worked for another large cable company and people would try to claim they never ordered the adult VODs and wanted refunds. Was great to get a log pulled and call them back and explain that not only was it ordered, but it was also paused, fast-forwarded, rewound X amount of times. Story 94. I learned this because I had to go to Target a weird amount of times in a 2-week period. There was an empty Monster Energy can, obviously visible on a shelf. Each time I went, I checked to see if it was still there. It was. I don't know when they eventually got rid of it, haha. Story 95. I was the only one who tried to spray my counter once every hour. Manger tried to cut costs by watering the cleaner down heavily, so I filled my bottle myself before my shift. Nothing else was ever cleaned after the first few days. Hell, they couldn't even mop the floor more than 3 to 5 times a year before COVID. Take this as a warning next time you bring a pet into a pet store. Sick animals come in all the time. Unvaccinated puppies from sketchy backyard breeders especially. Story 96. Not disagreeing with the other points, but saying that something comes from the same factory that makes lower-end stuff doesn't really mean anything. I worked at a food company and we made stuff of different quality and price points in the same factory. Story 97. General PSA. I think all piercings, even for kids and babies, should be done at a reputable tattoo piercing place by real professionals. I know doctor's office is a safe place too, obviously, but maybe more experience and better piercings done at the piercing tattoo parlors. My 6YO cousin got hers pierced recently, and I was so glad to hear her parents took her to a good tattoo piercing place. They have the experience and safety precautions in place. Story 98. I was gonna say, who the fudge would do that? Yeah, that's super rude. And then I remembered people are shoot if I was going to try to hide grandma at the theme park as have gone with in the flower bed. Story 99. And if the cast members see you dumping grandma's ashes in the ride, you will not only be responsible for an e-stop, evacuation, and biohazard cleanup, you will very likely have a meeting with the police sheriff and be escorted off of the property. Story 100. Similar to grocery stores in Western Canada, if not all of Canada. It's a massive monopoly. There's no conspiracy on country of origin labeling. That's just laziness and understaffing. Basically, support your local farmers markets. Even if they can't afford the organic label, it's better. Story 101. I work for a company that hired a ton of temps, and if you were lucky, they would eventually hire you on full-time. I got hired full-time after maybe 6 months. I was there for maybe 2 years, and in that time, a bunch of temps got hurt from tripping over stuff because the company just cared more about high production than making sure things were safe. Anytime a temp got hurt tripping over something, the temp agency was told they were no longer needed. This kept their lost time accident at zero for several years. One day I was riding my bike into work, my only mode of transportation at the time, and they just had the parking lot resealed. It was raining pretty bad, and when I turned into the parking lot on my bike, I wiped out and banged my head on the ground, good enough to give myself a concussion, and I wasn't allowed to leave and go to the hospital. I had to wait and go on my own time. That concussion fudged me up pretty good for 3 months, and I couldn't even do simple math and had a throbbing headache. Fudge you, CSM Bakery. Answer: I don't understand this. Won't let me leave? Fudge leave and go to the hospital. I'd call 911 and have an ambulance come and get me. I'd tell them it happened at work, while I was coming into work, etc. I talked to a guy that gut his hand badly on a deli slicer, and they wouldn't let him see a doctor for like 4 days. I asked why he didn't see a doctor on his own. He said they said he couldn't see one. Drives me nuts that people are so fudge clueless and are so unwilling to protect themselves, their health, or well-being. Story 102. A really good friend suffered a compression injury at the paper mill where she worked. The company wouldn't allow life flight, so she had to wait for over an hour for an ambulance to get there. During that time, the HR lady told her repeatedly that she didn't need to involve workers' comp. She could just work a desk job until she was better. Story 103. Years ago, I was a security guard at an automotive parts manufacturing plant that made parts for all the major auto companies. One guy was seriously injured, like you noted, disability for life type situation, and they put him at a computer in the guard shack. He never actually did anything, would just hang out. IDK what happened to him, TBH. Story 104. Yeah, I suspect most of us are also probably leaving rice out on the counter for longer than the 3-5 minutes it's supposedly good for before it has to be refrigerated after it's been cooked. But seriously, I didn't know rice can go bad so quickly until a year or two ago. I still don't refrigerate it immediately. I let it cool first. Story 105. Most hotel AC panels have a way to access an admin menu, and you can crank that thing as cold as you want. YouTube is a great resource to see if the one in your room has a way to do this. Here's an example. Story 106. I worked at a startup electric boat company that went under about a year ago. Our CEO wanted proprietary plugs to go from the wall to the charger. They were definitely different, but different in the fact that if they got unplugged, they were absolutely not touch safe and not designed for marine environments. Our chargers also had a habit of starting on fire. I saw a slow MO video of when it happens, and I would use the phrase eject plasma more than fire. Story 107. That reminds me of a story from HS in the very early 2Ks. A local, very small radio station was giving away tickets to a midnight showing of The Two Towers for the night of the release. It was probably 1-2 a.m. when I heard the giveaway. I believe they said that the 10th caller would get 4 tickets for the movie. So I called in, and I was caller 1, called back, and I was caller 2, called back again, and I was caller 3. It was either the 3rd or 4th back-to-back calls that they figured out that I was the only caller. They just gave up and said that I won, and that I would be on the air as the winner. After taking me off the air, they asked how many tickets I wanted, and I said 10. They gave it to me, so a bunch of my friends got to see it at midnight. Sadly, only 8 showed up. Story 108 was, I called to request a song from a college station back in the 90s, and accidentally was the 10th caller. It was a CD for a band I didn't listen to, so I was like, oh great, thanks. Could you also play this other song for me? I didn't get put on the air. I didn't even get the CD sent to me in the mail like they said they were doing. Come to think of it, I'm not even sure they played the song I wanted.